Welcome to the World Federation of Music Therapy Education and Certification Commission video series. The following interview aims to provide an overview of music therapy training, education and development of the profession in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So my name's Penny Warren and I'm a member of the Education and Certification Commission of the World Federation of Music Therapy for 2020 to 2023. And I'm thrilled to be able to introduce and talk with both Dr. Daphne Rickson and Dr. Sarah Hoskyns. So just a little bit about my lovely interviewees today. So Sarah is the Programme Director of the 2-year Master of Music Therapy programme at the New Zealand School of Music, teaching principles of music therapy, world music and music therapy, and supervising practice and second-year master's research projects in music therapy. Sarah is an experienced practitioner, teacher, and researcher in music therapy, previously being head of the music therapy department at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London until 2005. Sarah's doctoral research uses qualitative case study methodology to explore perceptions about the integration of practice and research in the training of master's students in music therapy. And Daphne, hello. Daphne's a registered music therapist and she's also adjunct professor in the New Zealand School of Music at Victoria University of Wellington. She qualified as a music therapist in the 1990s through what's now Music Therapy New Zealand. Daphne joined the National Council of Music Therapy New Zealand in 1993. She was council chair from 1997 to 2002 and president from 2008 to 2012. Daphne's been instrumental in ensuring that music therapists were recognised within the New Zealand special education system, the establishment of the Music Therapy Registration Board, reviewing Music Therapy New Zealand standards of practice, and the initiation of the Music Therapy Masters Programme at the School of Music in 2003. Daphne achieved New Zealand's first PhD in music therapy in 2010. Following the 15th of March 2019 terrorist attack in Christchurch, New Zealand, she supported the development of Music Therapy New Zealand's Aotearoa Crisis Intervention Working Group. Daphne is currently the Australasian Regional Liaison for the World Federation of Music Therapy Council. She's recently retired from her full-time tenured position lecturing and researching in music therapy after 15 years of clinical practice and 17 years in academia. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here. Okay, so after that lovely introduction to you both and thanking you for being part of this video series, I wonder if Daphne, you could share with us about the development of music therapy in New Zealand.
Sure, thank you, Penny. It's lovely to be here with you and Sarah. When I trained in 1988, there was no tertiary music therapy program in New Zealand, as you've already suggested. There were a handful of music therapists who had travelled abroad to train in Australia, Canada, England, and the United States. And Music Therapy New Zealand had started to facilitate what was called a music therapist's accreditation program. Now, this accreditation program involved working through individualized programs for candidates. So credits were earned by attending courses, which culminated in the writing of a substantial essay, completing music skills examinations, presenting oral and written case studies and doing a small research project. And then we also had an oral exam, which was facilitated by examiners from the fields of music therapy, as well as psychology. So I attended 4 or 5 of these courses, which were usually offered annually, and they were residential in nature. So they ran for up to 5 days. So this meant that we were working with our facilitators and peers for at least 40 hours, and we could use our time relatively flexibly, and had the opportunity for experiencing group process and other things as a team. And the course numbers were small, so the content could be individualized, but we had good opportunities for experiential learning. So it was a very different way of training to what's offered in universities. And this was a long time before we actually got the course established. As I said, 1988, I started training. So in 1992, soon after I had begun training, I joined Music Therapy New Zealand Council. And I think that these things are really important, because the way in which music therapy develops in countries where, you know, it's not well known at all, is by people finding their own ways to train and also finding their own ways to be political advocates. The Music Therapy Council consisted of music therapists as well as friends of music therapy who were working hard to develop music therapy in this country. And the kind of things we did was bringing out international music therapy clinicians, researchers and educators for the training, for conference presentations and workshops and professional development. And we did a lot of work promoting the national awareness and understanding of music therapy by visiting institutions and government departments. So we would go to universities, we would go and visit the Minister for Education or the Minister for Health to just increase this awareness. And then we started developing documents for and with authorities like the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, and eventually the Committee for the University for Universities Academic Programs. But we also had our own registration board, independent registration board, before even the course started. So we developed the registration board in 2000. So in the early days, people didn't know much about music therapy at all. There were just a handful of us here, and it was important to show potential employers might be possible, you know, what might be possible. And so I did this by engaging in small pieces of pro bono work in addition to anything that I could get paid for. And this kind of gradually become larger pieces of employment for me and for other music therapists. And we all gave regular presentations and, you know, went presented at conferences, not music therapy conferences, but special education conferences and so forth. And I think another really important thing to mention before I hand over to Sarah is that in 1999, the council supported me to do a tour and to attend the 9th World Congress of Music Therapy in Washington. So I was able to go to several places around the world. And then while I was in Washington, I was able to make personal contact with music therapy lecturers from several countries. And it gave me a real international perspective on music therapy education and training. And I collected information for council, like music therapy, course content and structure, supervision issues, salary scales. And I made strong contacts internationally with colleagues whom council could call on for advice in future. So, you know, there was a lot of work that was done, and before me too, of course. You know, before 1998, or 1988, I started where my interest in music therapy started. But Music Therapy New Zealand was officially formed in 1974. So, you know, there was a lot of work prior to what I've described as well. And I think it's really important to hold that in mind. But anyway, finally, in 2003, the Master of Music Therapy program was established at Massey under the directorship of Robert Kraut. And after Robert returned to the States, Associate Professor Sarah Hoskyns arrived. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah to tell us a bit more about how the program's developed since then.
Thank you, Daphne. Wow, it's really interesting to hear that history. Thank you. Sarah.
Okay, so I arrived in New Zealand at the beginning of 2005, and I was in the middle of helping develop courses towards master's level thinking from postgraduate diploma, which wasn't the case for every course in the UK, but there, at the time, I think there were 5 or 6 courses. And Anglia Ruskin University was the university which had first established a master's course. But at the Guildhall School, I was involved in developing a master's training. And it was really interesting to have the opportunity to see what another course was doing in another country around this idea of sort of building clinical expertise, but also keeping research as part of it. And I think I'd been thinking a lot about how does research happen, and how do we nurture and coach people towards it, because I think I'd had a sort of interesting relationship with research in my own career, of sort of probably being really quite a practical person overall, but always having an interest in research. So I sort of arrived at the beginning of the training course after Robert and Daphne and Morva Croxon had been working really hard to establish the course in a secure university setting. And may I just note, they did an extremely good job, because they created a situation where there were two lecturers. And I think initially the Daphne's position was one where it was annually renewed. But I think there was always the framework that there was work for two lecturers to support the growth and understanding. And I think having more than one person has always felt like it's a really healthy space, because I think between the two of us over the last sort of 16 and 17 years, we brought different strengths and different interests, and I suppose students are varied kinds of people, and so the interest in different areas of clinical work and interest in research that might be complementary have felt like they're an important part of the growth of both students in training, but also helping the profession develop here. So there was a strong basis of sort of respecting research as part of a high-level university training and framework. But I think it's been interesting that it was set up in that way, because in the UK they were all begun as practitioner training courses, and gradually research was becoming interesting. So I think the New Zealand course started at an interesting place in world history of what training was like, and I was very excited to be part of this. So it was well established here, and built, I should say, with a lot of knowledge and expertise, both from Robert Kraut's experience in America, but also Denise Grokey's experience in Australia, which brought a kind of strong Australasian set of knowledges to how the course was going to be. So yeah, I mean, and it was interesting coming from another tradition, because you realize it takes a long time to understand how cultures are built and develop. And so hearing Daphne's description of it, I mean, I think in every situation, it's it's an important challenge to try and dovetail the way you train to the culture of the place. And, you know, New Zealand has a small population and is quite widely spread. So it's something that we've had to think about, and we're particularly thinking about at the moment as we, you know, sort of try to resource music therapy around the country and into rural areas as well as city areas. Mm. I'll take a pause there because I suppose there's lots to say, but I think Daphne might have some thoughts about, you know, the actual training, you know, so what kinds of courses we have and the way we're approaching that, which might be a useful next step.
Sure. I think the the core of what we try to do is probably, you know, very similar to other courses around the world, where we obviously need to have very flexible music skills. And maybe that's something that we could discuss for just a moment, where, you know, initially there was quite a focus in our program on westernized music skills and qualifications that go with that. So there was an expectation initially that there would be a candidate would have music qualifications, and we recognized that the flexibility and the ability to improvise and to be flexible and adaptive with music was really important. So, but music is central to what we do. Understanding music therapy principles is central to what we do. Understanding and being able to be a good researcher is central to what we do. And I think the uniqueness comes through culturally related practices throughout what we do. And I think that's really important, that we don't just think that, you know, we have a world musics course, which we do have, but increasingly trying to find out how that might centre uniquely around New Zealand, Māori and Pacifica music and values and cultures, but that isn't something that we put into the course and leave it there and that's what we teach to. But, you know, we very strongly hold the value that, you know, the New Zealand culture and the Māori and Pacifica culture needs to permeate what we do. So there's a lot of standardized things in there, but they all have a very unique New Zealand focus. Do you want to pick up there again, Sarah?
Yeah. So the courses that Daphne's mentioned just now include a principles course. I think she was implying a methods course, using varied musical methods, and exploring that in an experiential way amongst groups of students. And that's our sort of initial introduction to the field and the program. And I noticed, interestingly, that over time, the number of theories that we think about and introduce to students has in a really important way. So we sort of try to introduce students to world authorities on music therapy and look at how their theories are being used. And, you know, we probably started off with 3 or 4, and we're now sort of, you know, 7, 8, 9 major theories of how music therapy is practiced with different fields of work. I should also mention the diverse range of placements, which both Daphne and Penny have been involved in helping us recruit from different areas around the Wellington, where we are based, but also around the country. And we have tried our best to make sure that we're representing health areas, non-governmental organisations, education, some justice areas, and community-based providers. And I think we're proud of having a good range of those, in the hope that those will carry on to be areas of employment for students. So there's been a strong focus on trying to be really pragmatic about introducing music therapy via students to a range of settings, and then hoping that those will carry on. And I think both of you probably agree that we've had some pretty diverse and interesting placements. Sort of most recently, we've got placements in children's wards of hospitals. We used one of the local prisons last year, sometimes in drug and alcohol support, definitely in schools and mainstream schools and specialist schools, in some acute areas of health and adolescent health. Could probably add some others, both of you, but it's been really interesting seeing who's interested about it. And we have much more requests for placements now, as I think the word has begun to spread and people are more aware of it. But when I first arrived, there were 17 music therapists registered, and it's delightful to see we're near the 80 to 90 level. And of course that takes time, but it does feel like we're better known, and feel more strongly grounded in the registration of music therapists who've all taken that training.
I was interested when you were talking about the impacts early on of the different cultural approaches to music therapy. So, you mentioned Denise Grokey and Robert Kraut specifically. So how has that developed and changed? Or is it very similar?
So the influences on... Well, I suppose, what's been interesting in recent years has been having visiting music therapists who've either examined our students or taken a role in sort of visiting our training course. So I remember, Daphne had Barbara Wheeler came to talk to some classes recently. Mike Viega has had a little influence on our thinking about arts-based research. And I remember back in the day that Mercedes Pavlicevic did some really important influence. And I suppose it goes back to what Daphne said early on about the importance of international visitors for the original accreditation course. But in recent times, our examiners and sort of visiting lecturing places in our courses have influenced us. I think Professor Kat McFerrin and Felicity Baker have both had a strong influence on us by both collaborating in research, acting as visiting researchers, and being advisors to the whole frame of the school. So Felicity did that job for us in recent times. So I think our relationships with outside bodies has felt really important. And I've named a few at the moment, but I think we'll all think of individual influences of our outside international colleagues that have felt really important. I have one link in particular with Professor Leslie Bunt, who I believe trained Penny back in Bristol
No, you trained me at Guildhall.
I trained you. Oh yeah, at Guildhall when Leslie was there.
But he was there, yes.
You worked in Bristol, didn't you, Penny? I do remember that I trained you back in the day. Yeah. So Leslie and I have sort of talked over time about sort of different ways in which our own experiences have influenced our teaching and learning. And Leslie is a guided imagery and music practitioner and has quite strong links with Denise. I think I'm aware of those influences which sort of make me think and encourage students to go and sort of take an interest and pursue those kinds of links. They get excited by it and it seems important to their area of practice. Our course has grown as an eclectic training course, which has had influence from a number of areas. And I wonder if Daphne might like to tell us a bit more about community music therapy and your consultancy work, which I think has influenced our training a lot.
Sure. I think, just to add to what you've said, that our students' research, as well as our own extensive research, really does guide our teaching. And as you said, my experience, which was both practice-based and research-based, of starting out thinking, how can we provide music therapy to people in geographically dispersed areas, ended up in being research around consultancy, which moves you to thinking about community music therapy. And then we're working with vulnerable people, which moves us to think about critical disability studies. And so just, remaining totally immersed in our own research and practice, and really encouraging our students to explore different ways of looking at the practices that they're doing in placement and researching the practices that they're doing in placement as well, has really kept us moving and expanding and growing, I think, in a really exciting way. But I just wonder if I could just for a moment go back to placements, because I think one of the things that might be really important for people who are developing music therapy in their countries to consider is the idea that there won't be supervisors for placements when you first set out to do them. And we've had to find really responsible professionals within the organizations who are willing to take our students, eager to take our students. And so we're using other professionals, allied health professionals or medical or education professionals who provide supervision for the students while they're on placement, with always a music therapist from the course or an external music therapist as an additional supervisor. But that's the model that we've had to use, because we can't just put students straight in to work with another music therapist. And I also think it's been quite an exciting dilemma that we do have a lot of organizations and institutions who ask for music therapy students. So they're clearly starting to see the value of the work, and it's not difficult at all to place students. But there also needs to be quite a balance of responding to that request, and then making sure that that turns into paid employment, and that these places don't continue to get perpetual students. So work creation, as Sarah alluded to, trying to ensure that students create work from their placements, that they can stay on after they've done some good work there and be paid for it, is one of our goals too.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is it was mentioned earlier that the number of music therapists has increased since Sarah's moved here. So we're now possibly around 80 music therapists, thereabouts, from say 17. And therefore that indicates that there's probably been a great spread of the development of places that people are actually working in terms of music therapy. And could you just say a little bit about that, your observations?
Can I just say one thing about that is that we began, as Daphne's alluded, with mostly placing students where there is no music therapist, but we now have a much more luxurious situation where we can actually place students alongside an experienced person, and that of course is very valuable for students to gain that benefit of seeing somebody who's got a framework established and is able to guide them around policies and practices. But I suppose students have also really impressed us with their ability to use sort of reasonably flexible practical training to dovetail it into their own work. And we've been really impressed by lots of individual music therapists who have set up very, very capable businesses which are sustainable and managing to earn reasonable living, although we'd always prefer that they earned more money and could also create developmental opportunities for work. So I think we're at that stage now where it would be really nice to be able to reward people for their sustained practice and to have higher level responsibilities. But we're very proud of the work that our graduates have produced, and people are going on to continue research too. So that's exciting as well. People coming back to do PhDs and sort of thinking in developmental terms about how research might go forward in this country.
Yes, which is a big part of the training as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Did you want to add anything else, Daphne?
I can't think of anything right now. As soon as we close, I will.
Of course, we probably all will. But I'm just aware that we're coming to the end of time, and I want to thank you both for being available and to sharing all your experiences. So thank you very
much. My pleasure.
Thank
you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the best. Bye.
Bye-bye.